Hey, David, thanks for joining.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you taking out the time and your patience in hanging in there until we resolve these connectivity issues. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem at all.
Excellent. David, I think we can start with letting you introduce yourself to the audience. I've researched about you. I've come across different bodies of work that you've contributed to and also different podcasts that you've recently been on. But I think here for the audience, let us give you the floor to introduce yourself. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Well, my name's David Cobb. I've been a photographer for a long time. My first camera was a James Bond spy briefcase where I could press
Okay.
one button and it would turn into a machine gun, and another button it would take a picture. So that is literally my first camera, and I probably had that when I was 8. But after that, I got more serious. As I got into high school, I got one as a gift, and then I was in love with photography and practiced during the film days, shot a lot of film,
Mm.
shot a lot of infrared film, and then moved into the digital age. And when I moved into that digital age, it was also coinciding with long walks that I take. And the long walks along the Pacific Crest Trail from Mexico to Canada, I shot with my camera the whole way. More of a point and shoot. I had a Pentax point and shoot with that. And with that, I found out that I liked color. Color was everything that I wanted to see in my shooting, and I loved color, and that's what got me into photography. And then my next long distance hike was along the Continental Divide through the United States, along the Rocky Mountains. From started in Canada this time, went down to the Mexico-U.S. border, and with that, I looked at my slides again. It was the film days. So with that, I found out that it was color and form. I started picking up more rhythm and depth and repetition in my photography and utilizing that more. And then I walked the about 1,200 miles of the Canadian Divide of the Rockies. And with that, I saw a lot of wildlife, and I had a lot of rainy and snowy days and interesting light incidences. So I started to pay more attention to light, which is usually the first thing that you should pay attention to in photography. But I was a late bloomer, so it was a later thing that I paid attention to. And then I
Excellent.
decided to walk across Iceland from the northern tip to the southern tip, where that country is really, splitting apart on the tectonic plates. And with that, there's not a lot in the middle of Iceland. So I decided to photograph my hiking partner on that trip more. So expression and including more things, whether it's wildlife or including a person in a setting, as opposed to just a large landscape, maybe having some sort of life in there too that puts it over the top a little bit more and has something for the eye to grab onto and to just kind of get used to and pay attention to.
Wow. So that's a lot of hiking and a lot of photography. I bet you've had a good time.
I had a good time, and I had some hard times, but I
Yeah.
learned a lot. I paid
Yeah.
more attention to my photography, and that's when I really started to get serious. And in 2004, I decided to become professional, and I started doing the workshops, selling prints, doing podcasts, and a lot of other things in photography that photographers do. And I've
Yeah.
got 4 books out, 2 with the Photocascadia team, one on Oregon, one on Washington, and 2 on Japanese gardens that I did myself. And the 5th book is printed in Germany, actually, with the Photocascadia
Wow.
team and a guy
Wow.
named Christian Heeb.
A question that comes into my mind, David, on that is, so I know you've been in teaching, doing workshops and all. Have you also participated in different competitions? What's your take on that?
I have done competitions, and I haven't done them for a long, long time. So the competitions the last ones that I was doing was a garden competition out of the Kew Botanic Garden in London, England. With that, I had a lot of success there, especially, with my Japanese garden images, winter image that I photographed right up the road, did well and placed second
Oh,
nationally.
congratulations.
So that one worked out too, or internationally, I guess. And then I've had exhibitions at the Kew Botanic Garden through that contest, but also my Japanese garden images have shown at the U.S. Botanic Gardens, the National Institutes of Health, at other places around the country.
Brilliant.
So,
So, as you and I have discussed, right, the way we get into this discussion is we start with the introduction and we generally want to go into understanding somebody's photography philosophy, try to go into thinking from your perspective of what do you see, how do you see it, how do you conceive shots, what goes behind you in your mind when you are at a location.
okay.
You should. If you can shed a little bit of light on that.
I don't do a lot of pre-planning. I really like to go to a location and see what's there. So I'm not using a lot of things to find out where the moon's going to be, where the sun's going to be. I pay attention to the light. I pay attention to the natural areas. I'm looking at for the small scenes. I'm looking for the grand landscape. I'm looking for macro and
Really?
paying attention
Okay.
to the light and what's going on. And then finding out what's there and then photographing what I like to see, what moves me. And, when I kind of know it when I see it. So there's a lot of intuition and more intuitive with my photography as opposed to being analytically driven to be at the right place at the right time, knowing exactly where the sun's going to be. And that's why I'm going there and I'm putting my tripods where someone else shot. That's just not me at all.
Interesting. So yeah, I would not probably want to use the term, but the word that comes to my mind is this is more of a purist approach, right? You enjoy your time, you enjoy exploring your creative mind, and then you try to reflect all of that into a shot that you take.
Yeah, and I like discovery. I don't like the that I'm going to go to this waterfall and shoot the waterfall and then leave. I'm going to go to maybe that waterfall and I might photograph that waterfall, but I am going to look all over the place and I'm going to go on a walk and I'm going to hike into the woods and see what I can see and find what I can find. And with that long distance hiking, I often go backpacking and go back to the places that I didn't have time to photograph and I didn't photograph well. So there's a lot of places that I've seen that I return to and backpack to and camp and just stay there and photograph and see what nature gives me that day.
Sounds a lot of fun. So as we go with this, David, a lot of my audience here is all enthusiast photographers, freelancers, people who are stepping into this and adopting the passion. What we want to always do is when we hear from you all, the masters of the art, we ask you to pick up one of your shot and take us through what was going through your mind when you saw that shot. How did you conceptualize it? How did you plan it, compose it? And then we go into the details of where did you take that shot. So, if you want to share your screen and tell us a little bit about the shot that you have selected for this discussion, that'll be great.
Okay. Can you see everything okay?
I can see it. It's beautiful.
Okay. And so this is an image that I had actually envisioned at one point in my life because I was up here with my friend Sean Bagshaw, who you might know from doing his videos or his
Yep.
luminosity masks. And Sean and I were here in 2008 and we had a fabulous sunset. This is actually up near the Continental Divide, near Logan Pass in Montana, Glacier National Park, and it's closer to the Canadian border. This is about a 2.5 mile hike from the divide and the parking area at Logan Pass. So you walk up to this area and you can see Hidden Lake, and you can walk down to Hidden Lake if you wish. And then in the background is Bear Hat Mountain. Well, Sean and I were photographing this at a sunset one day, and I said, it would be great if a mountain goat, and there's lots of mountain goats, and there's bighorn sheep up in this area, an occasional grizzly. I've been here many, many times. And I said, it would be great if a mountain goat just walked right out to this ledge while we were photographing this sunset and posed for us, and we could photograph. And that's the scene that I really had in my mind. And I'd been back here many, many times. So in 2013, I was up here again and it was sunset, and it was a very similar scene as this, a nice sunset again. And then I was setting up for a landscape image again, not expecting the goat to appear. Like I said, there's goats up here all the time, but rarely do they pose for you like this. I've been up here many times since, and no goat has come close to doing this before. So what the goat did was to walk behind me and then walk down to the ledge and then take a right up to this ledge. So I was set up for landscape. I was set up at f/16 and I probably was at closer to a quarter. I don't know what I was set up at time wise, but then I changed my ISO from 100 ISO. I was shoot manual and went to 1000 ISO. And that gave me, at a 15th of a second or a quarter second, somewhere in there, that gave me enough time for this goat to pause and photograph it. And what I do with wildlife, I'm not a wildlife photographer. If they walk into my scene, then I am going to include them. And I don't like to photograph wildlife portraits. I like to show wildlife in their surroundings, in their environment. And this is the expression that I was talking about when I talked about light, color, form, and expression. This is the expression. And to give an example of what expression can do to a photo, with this particular image, I've photographed the landscape, which I've sold a couple of times, but add a goat to the image, and this image sells constantly. And it has done very, very well for me. So it's something I've been happy that I've taken, but it also has paid some bills, which is a good thing for a professional photographer. And with goats, I don't stress them. With animals in nature, I don't stress them. I don't walk towards them. I stay the way I stay. I didn't move an inch, but I set up the camera to photograph the goat when it paused. I don't whistle. I don't yell. I don't want to stress the animal at all. It is an animal in the wild, and I respect that, and I let it be as it may. So if it wasn't going to pause, then I don't get the image. But I was betting that it was going to pause. I knew there's some people off to the left, and I figured it would walk down past the ledge and look out at the scene. And that was my hope. And as soon as that passed that little tree in the foreground, then I knew that I had a nice image.
Brilliant. Now, one question I would ask is when we look at a shot like this, generally there is a lot of debate about stacking, about bracketing, and sometimes also manipulation in terms of sky replacement and all. How do you go about those topics? Do you do that? Do you think those are techniques that professionals should deploy?
Other techniques that people can deploy if they wish to, they're the ones with the camera. If that's what moves them, that's fine. With this particular image, I took an image for the land, and it was 2008, so I was using a Canon D Mark III. So it didn't have the dynamic range that I needed to capture the sky and the land. So at that 1000 ISO at about a quarter or a 15th of a second, then I was able to capture the land. I underexposed by a stop immediately after, and was able to get the dynamic range of the sky in. And with luminosity mask, I was able to blend the two. I hand blended it. And I had a little bit of lens flare coming in from the side.
Mm.
So I was able to get rid of that through a technique called frequency separation. I mean, now
Okay.
you just maybe use an AI clone or something like that.
Mm.
So it'd be a lot easier. But these are techniques that you would use back in 2008. The Photoshop didn't have all the bells and whistles that it does now. It was still a powerful tool, but
Mhm.
not nearly as powerful as it is today. And as far as sky replacements, I don't do that, but I know a lot of people do. But if they say that this is exactly the way it was and they're lying, then that's just lying. If they say I put in the sky replacement and they let you know that they put in the sky replacement, then it's fine. So
Um, and it's all about choices and how those choices are then represented and what they were feeling. Right? At that time, they could have imagined a shot in a certain way, and then they would make choices to present their feeling that they had at that time. That's how I would translate that.
yes, and as an example, I might do something like that at the ocean.
Mm.
I might take certain images and have a splash here and maybe a water spout coming up over there and a big wave smashing against the rocks and take three different images, in a roiling sea that's just huge waves. And I want to capture that excitement. So you really can't capture that excitement in one image. So I might take three separate images to capture different splashes to get that excitement within by blending it and putting those different actions within that one image to capture a feeling.
Okay.
So that is something I might do. With this particular image, I took the shot for the land immediately underexposed and took the shot for the sky and then brought the two together. So if there was two different images involved, then they were, gosh, I don't know, a 30th of a second apart. So not much at
Beautiful,
all.
beautiful. Um, the other question that we normally get asked a lot, especially when you're composing or doing landscape, is about the general rules of composition and the conception of rules are there to be broken, but you should be aware of them. What's your take on those aspects? And then how do you, sort of bring that into this shop?
The rules are made to be broken. I like to call them tools instead of rules, and
That's
I
a good one.
break them all the time. So with that, there are two things that I was interested in. One, I wanted the goat somewhere out on that ledge, pretty close to where it is. Could have taken a step or two more, and that would have been great as long as it cleared that tree. Something else is if you see this mountain, this is called Bear Hat Mountain right here. So if you see this mountain and then that notch, I was paying attention to this notch and that mountain because they mimic each other. You could fold this mountain into that notch right here, but the
Okay.
way they mimic each other was important to me.
Hmm.
So having the scene set up that way worked for me. And I also wanted a few more mountains in there to help balance the scene out, especially this light up in this corner
Yep,
that
that's
helped create some balance,
beautiful. Yeah.
especially balance with a goat. So those were all important to me. But as far as rules, I grew up on Western art, and the way Western art creates rules is one way. But I also, as I said, photograph a lot with Japanese gardens, and I pay attention to a lot of Chinese compositions. So I go to art museums all the time. I learn a lot about competition I learn about a lot about how people lay out their images through art. And I pay a lot more attention in the past 10, 15 years to art from the East. So whether it be China, whether it be Japan, or anywhere else in this world, I'm learning a lot from art around the world and incorporating that more into my Western view because it is a very large world and the West isn't always right in how they do a lot of things. But as far as this particular composition and how someone from China might do it differently, someone from Japan might do this very differently. And there it's more of above and below, as opposed to the West, which says rule of thirds. So that is taking more of a life in my photography. This is an older image, so it's based more on Western art. My newer images are based more on that tug of war between the West and the East that's in my mind.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think it's a very good reflection of art transcending boundaries. It really sort of brings that whole concept out of what you can explore and feel creatively when you go transcend boundaries and try to connect to art that is being done on the other side of the world.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Brilliant. Now, to capture a shot like this, we always also talk about one part is to capture it on field, and the other part is now to finish it in the studio. And so, what kind of editing flows you have? What tools do you use on that side?
Well, with this, I use Photoshop. I use Adobe Camera Raw as opposed to Lightroom that most people use. And I do that because Adobe Camera Raw, I learned before Lightroom was even invented. So that's what I've stuck with. And as I mentioned earlier, this particular image is a blend of two images for dynamic range. And with my R series lens, Canon R series lens that I have now, it would be easy to capture in one shot.
Yeah.
But at the time, that was going to be impossible given the dynamic range of this particular image. So I did process two raw images, one for the sky and one for the land, and then I blended those images. And as I mentioned also that in the right-hand corner, there was some light spots and glare. And with that, I use frequency separation to get rid of that. So you can look that up. There's a ton of YouTube videos on how to take care of frequency separation. But with this particular image, it's just was after it was blended, it was pretty simple there was just really nice light coming through and just adding the contrast, a little bit of warmth, a little bit of vibrance with that, and a little bit of luminosity adjustment to the midtones. And then I was off to the races and it was pretty much done. But I zoom in at 100%. I always clone out dust spots or any other things that are looking weird in there. So I get rid of that. And then it's this was a fairly easy image to process.
It is beautiful. Also, as part of bringing the shot to a closure, how about getting it framed? What kind of labs do you use? Do you get them framed often, or do you just post on social media and websites and sell through those?
I have a printer here,
Yeah.
and I sent, usually when I sell prints, I don't want to frame them and then send them out because I don't know what kind of house the people live in and what kind of frame they want. And it's a lot more expensive, and the glass can break, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong. So if I'm printing it, some people might prefer one way. And others, they might want it on canvas, and or they might want it on aluminum, or they might want it somewhere else. So those would be sent out to the lab. And if it's a smaller print, then I would do it here in-house and send it out that way, which is the prints that I've sold so far with this have been smaller prints. So that was all done in-house.
Also, going back to, we were talking at the outset about conceptualizing a shot like this. How do you plan your shots? As in, do you look at it more from a logistic perspective, or do you blend it with your hiking activities? The reason why I'm asking this is, as part of this discussion, what we also want to do at times is to let the people be aware of which location is that, where is it exactly, so that, if they want to recreate it, and then when they're recreating this shot, they perhaps will also explore five other things, and then they'll probably challenge their sense of creativity. So you mentioned this was at the Canadian border in Montana, but from a logistics perspective, was it all aligned with your hiking activities, or was it separately planned as such?
Yeah, this location is near what's called Logan Pass, and that is on the going to the Sun Highway in Glacier National Park. And when you get up to Logan Pass, there's a parking lot and a trailhead, and the trail will take you to Hidden Lake. But I prefer, instead of going down to the lake, I prefer to stop up here and photograph this scene. And I enjoy this scene more when there is snow on that bare mountain. So a late fall is a good time to come up here, and the goats are everywhere at that time. Fall is a good time to come up to this area. Because in Glacier National Park, there are fewer people. Fall tends to be colder. Bring a headlamp to this area because you'll be walking. If you get sunset up here, you'll be walking back in the dark, and you'll be walking back in the dark in grizzly bear country. So be prepared for that too. One reason I like this area is that valley to the right always gets the sun in September. The sun always sets in that valley. So you're getting the latest light possible for this particular area. In the summertime, you can come up here and there are just wonderful thunderstorms, but a lot more people. And if there's thunderstorms and you get drama and dramatic clouds, you do have to be aware of lightning. So that is another consideration at that time too.
Brilliant.
But it's about a 2.5 mile walk, and there are boardwalks in some places and then just a dirt trail in others. And it's highly regulated because you can't leave the trail. This was back in 2008 when it wasn't regulated and you could step off the trail a little bit more, but the trail was getting worn out. But now it's highly regulated, and you do need to stay on the trail.
Understand. I think also one other angle to look at it is, and I know you talked about animal portraits versus the landscape. How different is it from a composition perspective or conceptualization perspective when you are looking at just doing a portrait, because a portrait has to have certain elements for it to be a striking image, right? So how do you differentiate between those?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm not a wildlife photographer, and more of a landscape photographer and a garden photographer. But this particular image and others like it, I will include wildlife. And how that would differ is I really would want the eyes to be sharp. I would want the glint in the eyes. If there's some light in the eyes, that's always a good thing for wildlife because it shows that that animal is actually alive as opposed to a dead animal. So if you get that glint in the eye, that is something that little highlight is something that you should be aware of. If you're doing a portrait and you're not getting the whole animal in, be aware of your surroundings. If there's a giant log sticking out behind the animal's head, then maybe you should wait for a little bit and wait until that animal passes that stick or giant log and moves away from that, and you have a cleaner background. So really pay attention to your background when you're photographing wildlife, especially if it's close up. And also pay attention to your speed, because I turned the ISO up to 1,000. But typically when I'm photographing wildlife, slower moving wildlife, I might turn my ISO up to 400. If I'm photographing a bird in flight, it might be a 10,000, I might want to photograph that bird in flight at a 10,000th of a second to get it stationary and not blurred. So there's a whole host of things. You can also, a lot of cameras have a C area on the letter C on the camera, and you can pre-program in on your camera a wildlife setting. So for instance, with this, if I was photographing at f/16 and I was photographing at ISO 100, and I saw that now, if I saw that goat coming in there, I could turn it right to the C setting, and I have preset settings for wildlife in there, and bang, there's either 2 or 3 that you can pre-program in there, and you just click it to C1, C2, C3, and you're in wildlife setting, wildlife mode. So that's something to think about. If you're a landscape photographer and something wanders into your scene, then you can have it set up and get there quicker than I did with this particular image. But I had a lot of time with this image, so it wasn't something I needed to set right away.
That's an amazing tip, David. Thank you very much for that. And when we are talking about tips, I think a few general guidelines that you would want to give us, the hobbyists and the newbies in the field, especially when it's all about composition and executing the shot.
Yeah, well, with this particular image, having the animal looking into the scene, so keeping it on the left, looking to the right, or vice versa. So the rule of thumb is to do it that way. It doesn't always have to do it. You don't always have to do it that way. Again, rules are tools. They're made to be broken. So if you need to break it for any reason in your particular image, then go ahead and do it. Don't worry about it. But the way this was, I wanted it looking off into that valley, so that was looking into the scene. I also like to pay attention to the light on the animal. With this, you can see the rim glow
Yeah,
on that
that's
goat.
beautiful. Yeah.
And that I really like. I pay attention to that. Backlighting is wonderful with images. You could be in Africa getting silhouettes of giraffes with trees, or a silhouette of an animal up in a high tree. There's just a lot of different ways to do that. And silhouettes with animals aren't a bad thing. So just because we can show detail with our cameras these days with digital doesn't mean we always have to show detail. Let it go into silhouette sometime, and that's not a bad thing either. And again, I want to stress that these are wild animals. So with wildlife photography, whether it's a portrait, whether it is wildlife in its environment like this one, don't stress the animal. You will get a better image if the animal is not stressed. Just let it go about its business. And if I'm seeing light that I want that animal to walk through, then I will station myself somewhere else. I might put on a telephoto lens, and I will wait for that animal to feed and slowly make its way to the light where I want it to photograph. Eye contact is really good. So if it's in the light and it picks its head up and looks at me or looks in my general direction, then I'll get the glint in the eye, I'll get the eye contact, and those are important things in wildlife photos.
Brilliant. That's amazing, David. Thank you very much. I think these are all some golden words here. I'm sure the audience will take note of that. I think
Okay,
with this, we will wrap up. Thank you very much for your time, David. I
thank
really
you.
appreciate. And yeah, I think, anytime you are out here in Dallas and the areas around here, let us know. We might hook up. But I really appreciate, and there's a lot to learn from people like you. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join the show.
Thanks. I've been in Texas 14 out of the last 15 years, so you never know. The last time I was in Dallas, though, was to see art. So I
All
enjoy
right.
the museum there a lot.
Excellent. Well,
Great.
thank you very much, David. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You have a good one.
You too.